understanding, and I hope to provide a clear perspective about how educators, from an educator's perspective, how we actually teach, considering the philosophy and the question in mind, is evolution God's plan? So I'd like to start by saying I was very honored, of course, especially I anticipated to be amongst people who have science background, a strong science background, or may have, kind of got into the research of the, science as well as religion to see where the position is from an Islamic perspective. Um, Tonight's question is evolution's God's plan is one of the most enduring questions of human inquiry. It asks how scientific discovery, theological meaning, and educational responsibility can coexist. I speak to you not as a scientist or theologian, but as an educational leader, someone responsible for curriculum, teacher support, and ensuring that students from diverse cultural and religious backgrounds receive an education that is both academically rigorous and humanly respectful. How we teach evolution shapes students' understand knowledge and evidence, faith and meaning, whether learning is something to fear or something to approach with courage. I invite you to reflect on this guiding question. How do we teach ideas that may challenge students' worldviews while preserving scientific rigor and honoring their identities? By the way, this question is not necessarily just for science, but since we're focused on science, I'll stick to that. But we experience this in almost every subject. So especially with social studies, history, considering the politics around the world. So why this question matters in education? The question before us is not only what is true, but how truth is taught. Who feels included and whether classrooms become spaces of fear or inquiry. In the Islamic tradition, the first revealed command was not believe, but God in the Holy Quran stated, Iqra. This reminds us that faith and learning are not opposites, they are partners. Yet in many K-12 classrooms today, evolution creates anxiety. Students may fear having to choose between science and belief. Teachers may fear conflict with families and communities. School leaders fear controversy rather than dialogue. Our role as educators is not to resolve theology. Our responsibility is to teach knowledge with integrity, create space for reflection without fear, ensure students are not academically disadvantaged because adults avoid difficult topics. Before discussing perspectives and strategies, we must first ground ourselves in what science education actually requires at the K-12 program. In the United States, and specifically in the state of Michigan, science instruction is guided by the next generation science standards, in parentheses, NGSS. Many of you may have heard of that. The NGSS requires that students understand evolution as a unifying concept of biology, how species change over time. Also, to analyze evidence, common ancestry, natural selection, and adaptation. Examples, of course, the metamorphosis of a butterfly, camouflage in insects, thick fur in cold climates, defensive behaviors like playing dead. Third aspect of the requirements is engage students in scientific practices and modeling, explanation, having arguments from evidence using fossils, genetics, and biodiversity data. NGSS does not ask students to adopt philosophical or theoretical beliefs. It asks them to understand how scientific knowledge is constructed. NGSS is about how we know, not what to believe in. This distinction is vital in educators navigating multicultural classrooms. Avoiding or diluting evolution instruction does not protect students. it disadvantages them academically and professionally. Teaching evolution clearly and accurately is non-negotiable responsibility for educators. So this is something we have to teach, not just as a requirement, but as the fact that how it benefits students. And not only that, those who read the Quran or read the Quran, it's constantly reinforced that we have to seek knowledge and not just take things for granted as this. God gave us freedom to do that, so we can analyze and make our own decision. And there's a statement, La ikraha bid-din, so nobody can force the religion upon us. We have to study it, we have to read it, we have to internalize it, to believe in it, to know it. And that's a form of research as well. So in line of the scientific theories. Historically, and let's now consider the historical and cultural context of evolution and faith. For Muslim participants and for our interfaith colleagues, it's important to recognize that engagement with nature, casualty, and change has deep roots in Islamic intellectual history. Several classical scholars demonstrate thoughtful engagement with natural processes. Al-Jihaz in the 9th century observed how environmental factors influence survival and characteristics of organisms, ideas that resemble early reflections on adaptation. Ibn Khaldun in the 14th century described a gradual progression in creation, from minerals to plants to animals, and toward human beings, emphasizing continuity in nature. Within Islamic thought today, perspectives vary, of course. Some support, some disagree with. One literal creation perspectives, especially regarding Adam and Eve. Theistic evolution perspectives, viewing evolution as a divinely guided process. Hybrid views, accepting evolution for non-human life while affirming a special creation of ensoulment of humanity. The most significant tension typically centers on human origins, not on evolution as a biological process itself. Educational leadership across, I would say, there are similar diversity issues across Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, and other traditions. So Islam is not the only one that has those issues. There's, people who agree and people who disagree, and people who stand in the middle. Educational leadership does not resolve theology. Instead, it asks, how do we teach science without turning it into ideology, and faith without turning it into anti-intellectualism? Evolution explains biological diversity. It does not address the existence of God, revelation, or moral meaning. As someone without a science background like myself, I rely deeply on the expertise of scientists, and one crucial distinction they consistently emphasize in this. Evolution explains process, not purpose. It describes mechanism. It does not answer metaphysical questions. From an Islamic perspective, this matters deeply. The Quran repeatedly points to processes in nature as ayat, means signs inviting reflection. Whether one understands evolution as a compatible with divine will, as a mechanism under God's command, or as a theory requiring careful theological boundaries, the educational responsibility remains clear. Students must learn evolution accurately and rigorously as foundational biological science. Teaching science poorly does not protect faith. It undermines trust in institutions, educators, and knowledge itself. Teaching evolution can be challenging, especially for teachers who may feel underprepared in science. Many may worry about student, parent, or community pushback, personal discomfort or controversial topics, conflict with local community beliefs. And from an educator's perspective, evolution instruction helps students. It helps them understand the natural world. Recognizing patterns in species adaptation teaches critical thinking and problem-solving skills, and that transfers to which may transfer to any career from engineering and medicine to law and policy. That has really helped me in my career as an educational leader, and can give you examples. At some point, I had to sit in hearings for students' discipline issues. And of course, how do you conclude when you don't have facts? You don't rely on this and that and so forth. You collect data, you analyze the data, you present the facts, and then you can make judgments and you look at the policies and everything else. So in almost every career, it does help students. And also, second, it helps develop evidence-based reasoning. Students learn to analyze data, evaluate competing explanations, and make informed decisions. These are lifelong skills essential for careers in STEM. STEM stands for science, technology, English language, art, and math. Also, it helps with the health sciences, environmental management, and beyond. It also helps connect science to ethical reflection. Discussions about evolution encourage students to think about human responsibility, stewardship of the environment, and societal impacts. You know the atomic bomb, right? So can you imagine we learn science and not think of the ethical issues that are involved? That's an example. So it bridges science with moral and ethical reasoning. The most powerful educators are not those with final answers, but those who model questions. What does the evidence show? What assumptions am I bringing? Where does science end and belief begin? How do we disagree with dignity? This is tarbiyah, formation, not instruction, not just instruction. From a leadership perspective, evolution education prepares students for future careers, builds trust through cultural respect, fosters curiosity and lifelong learning. In essence, teaching evolution helps students bridge the academic, professional, spiritual, and ethical dimensions of their lives. It prepares them not just for tests, but for meaningful careers, informed citizenship, and thoughtful engagement with faith and culture. Leaders support this work through professional development, offer workshops on the NGSS standards, inquiry-based learning, and discussion strategies for sensitive topics. Also providing inclusive teaching framework, encourage evidence-based inquiry, critical thinking, and open dialogue without imposing belief. This illustrates the power of leadership in shaping safe, inclusive, and academically rigorous learning environments. Let's look at the multicultural and faith-sensitive classroom strategies. So what happens when you have students with many different diverse backgrounds, which is what we have in our schools? We do have students from different faiths as well. I'm sure Dearborn Public Schools and Dearborn Heights and so forth, most classrooms have diverse students. So they bring diverse religious and cultural lenses to the scientific topics. Students present a challenge to teachers and to the learning environment. And it's up to the educators to know how to, you know, work around through those challenges. Successful, culturally responsive teaching includes recognizing students' beliefs, not humiliating them or ignoring them, encouraging reflection, engaging students to think, and creating safe inquiry spaces. Generation Z context. Students today are digital natives. We need to recognize that. And they're constantly encountering diverse perspectives online. Gen Z is growing up in a world of algorithm-driven information, polarization, and distrust in institutions. So we have to recognize these things exist as educators and deal with them. So They ask, who can I trust? They don't ask what's the truth. Who can I trust? Because there's so much information on social media and everywhere else. When educators say, here's what science teaches, here are its limits, here's how thoughtful believers reflect, here's how you can think critically, they model intellectual courage. Their courage is a leadership skill our future demands. To this end, our responsibility as educational leaders is to form critical thinkers with moral character, students who can hold complex truths without resorting to false simplicity, so shying away from the facts, the theory of evolution, the concepts, the processes, does not help our students to think critically. And equipping them to critically evaluate evidence while respecting faith prepares them for both academic and life challenges. So evolution is not just biology. It influences, like I said earlier, careers, ethical reasoning, and societal participation. There's medicine as an example. So understanding disease evolution and pandemics informs public health careers, and equips students to evaluate medical evidence critically. We've gone through COVID as an example, and the immunization that was presented to us. At some point, some of that immunization, the virus kind of, if this whole scenario was truthful based on the knowledge that we were presented with, so it loses effect. And so you're gonna keep getting a booster and whatever it is. It's a small example. Environmental science also and climate policy. Evolutionary principles underpin biodiversity conversation, sustainability, and ecological research, which are increasingly relevant for global careers and civic engagement. There's a factor of ethics, policy, and faith dialogue. Teachers and leaders can guide students to explore questions like, what responsibilities do humans have toward other species? Or how do science and faith inform moral decision making? Teaching evolution effectively equips students with STEM readiness, problem solving, analytical skills, ethical reasoning, grounded in evidence and empathy, of course. So, also, inclusive classrooms will, will guide or inform proper instruction. So, it leads to respectful inquiry, setting clear boundaries, and engaging parents to be part of the process because you need the buy-in of the parents as well. So how do you get the buy-in of the parents on theories that create conflict? So um, does evolution mean God didn't create humans? A student may ask you this question. So how do you address it? How do we address it? A suggested response for teachers when we train them. Science explains processes. Faith addresses purpose and meaning. Many people hold both together. So we have to reinforce these concepts over and over and over. Inclusive education does not erase difference. It creates intellectual hospitality. And that's why it's okay to teach evolution at the school level. I know we're required to teach it, but it's okay. It's how we teach it is what matters. And educational leaders have to be careful with what goes on in the classroom. It's important to kind of see lesson planning, not necessarily themselves, but they have departments who will do that. They oversee lesson planning, they oversee methodologies, they oversee performance. Why? Believe it or not, it's either you have to pay attention either to the ignorance and lack of preparedness of the teacher or the political side of it, which is more dangerous. Teachers can mold the brains and can mold the mentality and how the students think. If they ever have any ill intention, they can mislead students and brainwash them. We've experienced multiple incidents where we had to take action. So facts can be misconstrued. Um, So we gotta watch, prepare teachers at the same time we have to oversee. So inclusive education cannot erase difference. It creates intellectual hospitality, and students should never feel they must abandon faith to succeed. If they ever feel they're at this point, something is wrong in the classroom. So they should never be denied rigorous science education. So we're in full support of providing education in evolution. To this end, I will conclude the following. Curriculum is never neutral. So what we teach and how we teach communicates our values. Teaching evolution well communicates confidence in knowledge, respect for students' intelligence, and trust that faith is not fragile. Islamic civilization once led the world in science because it did not fear inquiry. Our goal is not to answer definitely whether evolution is God's plan, but to prepare students to navigate complexity, integrate knowledge with values, lead with wisdom and humility. And so, with that, I would say let us commit to classrooms where science and faith are partners in inquiry and not opposite, and where students grow into leaders capable of bridging scientific, ethical, and cultural divides. Thank you.